Before I even begin my presentation, I wanted to bring up a single line from E.T.A. Hoffmann's text, which enabled me to entertain this entire paper. Nearing the end, during the public speculation of Olympia's automation and what it means, there's a professor of poetry who declares to the public, "My most esteemed ladies and gentlemen, don't you see what lies behind all this? The entire matter is an allegory, an extended metaphor. You take my meaning. Sapienti sat." I would like to point out his statement of sapiente sat. This is a Latin phrase coined by Plautus, a Roman playwright, used to indicate that something can be understood without any need for explanation, as long as the listener has enough wisdom or common sense. This idea that the population is aware of this event, bringing a metaphor for something larger, is extremely important to my argument. Bettina Warburg, in her Critique of Science as Critique of Society, notes that Hoffmann kept a close eye on the scientific achievements of their time, and makes direct indication that this is particularly true for the SANDMAN. In this presentation and in my eventual paper, I plan to highlight that Hoffmann's SANDMAN is a cautionary tale, addressing the technological and scientific booming during the period of its creation, and how Penelope Scott's 2020 song Rat illustrates not only the same fears occurring in the story, but also echoes these concerns from a modern audience, where these fears have only been elevated since its progression. There are many threads of Pygmalion's creator and creation in this comparison, some greater than others in impact, but I want to mainly focus on the scientist as the creator and Nathaniel as the creation, alluding that Nathaniel represents the broader scope of the general population affected by these innovations. The SANDMAN's focus on sand should then be the result of the creator, and the moon as the ideal creation/end goal.
It's competition, and it looks like the only sure winner is going to be the customer.
I come from scientists and atheists and white men who kill God. They make technology high quality, complex, physiological experiments and sacrilege in the name of public good. They taught me everything, just like a daddy should. And you were beautiful and vulnerable and power and success. Goddamn, I fell for you. Your flamethrowers, your tunnels, and your tech. I studied code because I wanted to do something great like you. And the real tragedy is half of it was true. But we've been fucking mean. We're elitist. We're as flawed as any church. And this faux red West Coast dogma has a higher fucking net worth. I bit the apple cause I trusted you. It tastes like Thomas Malthus. Your proposal is immodest and insane. And I hope someday Summers rides her fucking train. I loved you, I loved you, I loved you, it's true. I wanted to be you and do what you do. I lived here, I loved here, I thought it was true. I feel so stupid and so used. I feel so used.
So first we're going to start with a historical overview, and my plan here is to give a very quick, very brief historical overview of all the references that Penelope Scott makes in her song, which inform not only the depth of her lyrics, but also highlights the events developing in the time when Hoffmann was living and writing in. If we jump back into Hoffmann's era, we're looking at the late 18th century into the early 19th century, which is quickly embracing and employing skepticism, rationalist thinking, and individualism. This is a period synonymous with the titles of Enlightenment, Rationalism, and Industrialism. Happening at this time was the separation between the individual and the church, and skepticism for its reasoning behind all things. So there's a boom in exploration of science outside of the scope of creationism, and with this, a major focus on economics, technology, and innovation. Around this time, Charles Darwin published his Origin of Species, which presents evolutionary science along with the economics and biological explanations for the growing of populations by economists like Thomas Malthus. This really outlines for us what the Enlightenment and rationalist thinking really looked like at the time. Hoffmann's SANDMAN is published after Malthus's work but before Darwin's. However, the developments and thinkings which led to Darwin's publication would have been occurring and taking place during Hoffmann's time. Thomas Malthus claimed that population growth will always tend to outrun the food supply, and in other words, there will always be a hunger crisis because as good supply grows, populations grow. This is completely incorrect, and I will dive deeply into this for my paper, but to put it simply, he based his ideas on the fact that when there is more food, there will be more people, and as we can tell today, population realistically increases when there's less access to food. A little after Malthus, Darwin is working on his theories of evolutionary biology. I was flipping through the Charles Darwin and Thomas Malthus fiasco like it was a teen magazine, and it's crazier than I could have even ever imagined. Darwin, in his Origin of Species, needed a reason to rationalize his theory of survival of the fittest. Malthus's earlier principle of population supports his claim that those who were able to access the available food because of their advantages would continue to grow as a population and thus weed out those who are not deemed as fit. That works really well when talking about earlier evolutionary changes, but when you get to a certain point, and we're past the hunter-gatherer stages, and we start to see major innovations in food production, that argument doesn't really hold up. Humans always puzzled Darwin, and he was a man of fact and scientific method, unlike Malthus. So Darwin looked at human behavior and concluded, not that there was something missing in his theory, but that humans are somehow operating against their own evolutionary self-interest, and that if we fail to correct this behavior, it will be a detriment to us all. But there was something missing in his theory. It was the understanding of the importance of human economic behavior. The truth is that when there's less food, there will be more children, which is why developing countries have such large populations. In a place where there is uncertainty whether your child will survive because you don't have access to adequate healthcare, reliable food and water sources, and safe birthing facilities, you will end up having more children because they may not all live, and you need more hands to tend to farms, family business, and take care of community. What's most important to note about this little bit of history is that the early economics and human sciences were based on a lot of social biases, and that these rationalisms they sought did not fully consider the entire scope of humanity, just the parts which convenienced them. Malthus's theory and Darwin's integration of it allows readers to focus on the changing of reproductive behavior of the other, namely people in developing countries, rather than the more relevant questions of equitable food distribution, promoting agricultural efficiency, etc., etc. The Western world therefore identifies with the idea that they have already reduced their birth rates, therefore the problem of poverty, income inequality, climate change, war, famine, and a host of other economic and ecological disasters can be solved if we just convince those other people to stop having so many children. This theory, which was based on quite literally no data or further inquiry into its truth, continues to perpetuate ideas of exclusion and elitism, since that's just the way it is. A little later on, in the industrialization period after Hoffman's time, is the war between Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison. If we are considering the Sandman as a cautionary tale, this conflict truly encapsulates the head-on fight for recognition that Hoffman explores between Spallanzani and Coppola. The patent war between Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla had a significant impact on their relationship, both engineers who worked in the field of electricity. They had very different approaches to innovation and held different views on the direction that the field should take. Edison relied heavily on experimentation for his quickly developing discoveries, having much less formal training. Tesla was a dreamer, but with his years of engineering training behind him, this enabled Tesla to picture any problem with a theory and try to solve the problem before it became a problem. It's in the late 1800s that their patent war occurs, a war over the development of practical systems for the distribution of alternating current energy. Edison, who supported and pioneered direct current electricity, saw this as a threat to his business and wanted to discredit any advancements in Tesla's developing alternating current. This became a battle of DC versus AC. He engaged in a public campaign to undermine AC technology and conduct controversial dangerous demonstrations where animals were electrocuted using AC current in order to prove its dangers. Tesla, who pioneered the development of AC energy, saw Edison's campaign as a deeply personal attack. Tesla eventually quit after other quarrels between the two, but he ended up winning the battle of currents, beating out Edison in the end. What is most important to note about this pairing is the battling which occurred shortly after Hoffman's time, and that very quickly intellects employ their differing thoughts as an extension of themselves. There's little separation between emotion and creation when it comes to an inventor's life's work. There's an undeniable power that comes with the position of innovation, and I believe that Hoffman began to question its ethics. As demonstrated by Scott's historical references, his cautionary story turned out to be right. Already in the early stages of industrialization, the crafting of a better future is not only an exclusionary one, but is also based on elitism, ending up being a fight of egos. So now we're going to do a bit of comparative analysis between the song and Hoffman's Sandman. For framing reference, here are the comparisons I hope to draw. The Sandman being technology, scientists including Nathaniel's father, Spallanzani, Coppelius, and Coppola being the techno-elite, Nathaniel, who's in an awkward position where he knows what's going on, but is still just like the laborers and general population, similar to the role of Penelope Scott, Clara being the laborers and general population, the moon portraying a better future, and the sand being the result of human industrialization and technology. This song comes from Penelope Scott's own experience being raised in the southern part of the San Francisco Bay Area in California, otherwise known as Silicon Valley. So we're all on the same page, Silicon Valley has been known as the global center for technology and innovation, and is home to many of the world's largest high-tech corporations. Silicon Valley accounts for 1/3 of all the venture capital investments in the United States, and it's there companies like Apple, Intel, Adobe, Netflix, PayPal, X, Amazon, Tesla, YouTube, and almost every company of major popularity and power that you can think of have either placed their headquarters or gotten their investments from. My thought was to go through the song and explain my comparisons along the way in hopes that you can see where the comparisons I'm drawing are from.
I come from scientists and atheists and white men who kill God.
Though an extremely jarring first line, these allegations come from quite a bit of truth. Scott is addressing the current figures of the tech industry, and specifically Elon Musk, with her title Rat, a short form and nod to the 2014 meme that his name is short for elongated muskrat. But as Scott explained in an interview, Musk stands as just a great symbol of the tech industry and the ideation they and we as the public have of the founder CEO title and the power that comes with that. We see these figures as godlike ones, single-handedly forging humanity's future through innovation and technology. Tying in Hoffman's period, we can see that this observation lies in the original foundation of these tech gods we've already established, being in Musk's great-great-great-grandfather's early roots at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution with the idea of science and reason over blind faith. So did these white men metaphorically kill God? I say yes.
They make technology, high quality, complex, physiological, experiments, and sacrilege in the name of public good. They taught me everything, just like a daddy should.
When thinking about this through the 21st century lens, we see factories and traditionally laborious processes optimized, taken on by technology. From the SANDMAN, we see these psychological experiments taking place through Olympia, but what Scott mocks here is the idea of the public good, and I'll get to exploring that a bit later. Scott situates herself as a naive child, and we see these accusations all throughout the SANDMAN. The story of the SANDMAN and the thing that first traumatizes Nathaniel is based off the idea of childlike naivety, but also curiosity. They come up with this myth to scare children into not disturbing the adults based on threat of physical harm. But this theme of childlikeness is carried throughout the whole story when characters like Clara and Sigmund accuse Nathaniel of this by their own use of rationality. Scott claims that these scientific godlike figures have informed her perception, and we perceive that daddy could be her parents who encourages this path, or even figures like Musk as a public daddy with promises of a better future with his metaphorical children. So if Scott sings of this broader father figure, we can consider that Hoffman may be suggesting that daddy is the larger entity of the Enlightenment and industrialization period at the time, like Scott is. Even Nathaniel's father treats the tech industry with this naive daddy approach. Nathaniel recounts that our father behaved towards him as though Coppelius were a higher being whose foibles must be endured and who had to be kept in good mood at whatever cost. And if Coppelius is meant to embody the power of the industrialization, its godlike appearance has been prevalent long before public figures like Elon Musk.
You were beautiful and vulnerable in power and success. Goddamn, I fell for you. Your flamethrowers, your tunnels, and your tech. I studied code because I wanted to do something great like you. And the real tragedy is half of it was true.
Here Scott continues her criticism of Musk, directly referencing his pursuit of making a flamethrower as a joke and building an underground tunnel solely for Teslas as a solution he came up with after being annoyed that he was stuck in traffic. She discusses in interview the absolutely legendary status Musk held in places like Silicon Valley where she was growing up, where the coolest thing ever as a tween was the idea that you could build a tunnel because you were annoyed. Musk makes effort to present himself as a personable figure compared to other leading tech figures, with his enormous presence on Twitter, now known as X because Musk bought it. She states that she fell for him and pursued a path like him based on this adoration she had and the widespread influence Musk held. She places herself in a place of guilt and complacency, which is leaned on further throughout the song. Nathaniel can be seen in the same light. He was surrounded by and adored his father. They sat around him after dinner and merely listened to him speak. Although the tale of the SANDMAN was based on fear, he also held a great love and respect for his father, and was completely devastated when he died. Nathaniel goes on to pursue a higher education, like the focus on innovation and intellect that his father had. The only subject of his study identified in the story is physics, which already is an indication that his studies would have been in the realms which supported the science of the period. So although it is not directly said that Nathaniel wants to become a scientist, there is enough evidence to support that his studies followed at least some of the same paths his father would have. Outside of this, whether Nathaniel wants it or not, these studies follow him. He experiences this traumatic experience linked to technology and fire, and then is followed by the man who represents this in his mind, Coppelius/Coppola. Along with this, a fire is the reason that he is placed conveniently before his professor's house, across from the very product of his dread that he inevitably falls in love with. Therefore, just like Scott, Nathaniel is placed into this complacent and uncomfortable in-between of something they support but also fear.
But we've been fucking mean. We're elitist. We're as flawed as any church. And this faux rad West Coast dogma has a higher fucking net worth. I bit the apple 'cause I trusted you. It tastes like Thomas Malthus. Your proposal is immodest and insane. And I hope someday Summers rides her fucking train.
This is where Scott takes a turn to make accusations, and in my opinion, they are more than deserved. We return back to this idea of a church, dogma, and cultish following. The church in this scenario represents the idea of faith itself, but more importantly, the pure power the institution of a church holds. Throughout a lot of histories, the church has been the crux of discrimination and colonization, yet it remains an entity with an immense amount of sway and social immunity. Scott compares this faux rad West Coast dogma, the idea of going full force into technological advancements, as an ideology, and how radical that is, compared to the power that the church holds, claiming that this tech dogma holds a higher net worth since its foundation is built on commercialization, unlike a church whose basis is built on non-commercialization. The Vatican alone holds a net worth of around $6.9 billion, but the tech industry still have a higher one, even with its birth being well after the church's, with a net worth of nearly $1.1 trillion. Hoffman plays with this idea of economic divide. At the beginning of his book, Nathaniel writes about how Clara assumes he is living in the laps of luxury and have completely forgotten the lovely angelic image which is so deeply imprinted on my heart and mind. This creates a divide in the minds of readers that Nathaniel is situated at a higher level of living than Clara, who lives back in the presumably rural outskirts. Nathaniel and Clara juxtapose one another, with Nathaniel at this point engaging with the industrialization of the period, and with Clara understanding this but watching from the sidelines. Nathaniel thus takes a really important position, one parallel to Scott, who is contributing but skeptical of her position. Scott directs our understanding of the promises given by this godlike tech industry, and that she bit the apple because I trusted you, alluding to Eve's sin, but that the promises were false, and that what the tech industry offered was not the wondrous potentials of investing in their forbidden fruit, but was instead a truth which mirrors Thomas Malthus's principle of population. We start to see the same type of exclusion in Hoffman's novel. Clara and Nathaniel begin to see their divide, and Spallanzani holds a ball by invite only, but more importantly, and that those controlling the fate of Nathaniel, and metaphorically the future fate of general populations, are a few white men. If we take Hoffman's Sandman as a cautionary tale, we can see that Hoffman has been able to identify these problems with the increasing industrialization around him, and he foresees the divide already growing. At this point in a techno future, they didn't even know what the apple they were biting would even turn out to look like. Selmers is a reference to the video game Night in the Woods, bringing in Scott's very crunchy game-type beat to her song, where you would approach a small little character named Selmers in the game. Selmers would say cute little poems, but eventually gives a random, long, not rhyming poem about how she's so sick of hearing about tech god boy billionaires in Silicon Valley, and that she someday might just take a train there and start fires. Scott utilizes Selmers, a video game character and indirect creation of Silicon Valley, to give the final blow of her pent-up anger before we get to the chorus of the song. Although a very small reference, Selmers relates to Nathaniel, who rhymes off angsty poetry throughout the story. The player's reception of Selmers in the game is supposed to be jarring and confusing, where at a certain point you just brush her off, and we can see this in Clara. The player just continues their game, and similarly, Clara just continues to knit. Both medias push these majorly concerned cries of frustration and concern to the side, not taken seriously by those receiving them.
I loved you, I loved you, I loved you, it's true. I wanted to be you and do what you do. I lived here, I loved here, I thought it was true. I feel so stupid and so used. I feel so used. I was your baby, your firstborn, the hot girl in your comp sci class, and I was Darwin's prep school dream, bred, born, and raised to kick your ass. I fell for circuit boards, rocket ships, pictures of the stars. If you could only be what you pretend you are. When I said take me to the moon, I never meant take me alone. I thought if mankind toured the sky, it meant that all of us could go. But I don't want to see the stars if they're just one more piece of land for us to colonize, for us to turn to sand.
We've already established the Charles Darwin and Thomas Malthus connection, but to reiterate, Malthus believed that when there was more food, population would always grow to outrun its availability, thus being a theory to caution population control. Darwin took this idea to support his theory of survival of the fittest, and the fittest being the population having access to said food. This is all to say that Scott mentions Darwin and describes herself as the ideal candidate, that she, in the 21st century Silicon Valley, would be that which survives because she's the fittest, and in modern terms, since it's no longer actually about survival, she's the ideal. It's a perspective filled with biases, racism, and elitism, and both Malthus and the early works of Darwin directly utilize this to inform who is the issue of the problem. Scott mocks the fetishisms of circuit boards, rocket ships, and pictures of the stars when we aren't addressing the elephant in the room, that there are so many more issues to solve, and that all this funding which techno-elite companies utilize to build random tunnels because there's too much traffic can be spent solving actual real-world issues that will make it a safer and happier place for everyone. Those who are supporting the production and mass consumption of the 21st century are those who have inequitable realities, yet we lean on their labor in order to fuel our own elite Eurocentric safe haven. Hoffman addresses this in his text through the character of Nathaniel. Though Nathaniel is a player in the institutions of higher education, he is still used as a test subject. Nathaniel's reality directly feeds the research and support of the scientists with a very scary Pygmalion-esque tone which prioritizes the perfectioning of their automata rather than recognizing or saving Nathaniel's very quick descent into madness. I want to remind everyone that Hoffman's story itself says that these interactions were a metaphor for something larger, and I think the identification of this issue is very, very scary and far too accurate to our own reality right now. This is where Scott's connection to Hoffman gets eerily similar. We see that Scott references both the moon and sand, which are core components of the Sandman myth told to Nathaniel as a child. Through Scott, we can see that the moon is an ideal, the future we are working towards, where space travel is accessible enough for her to see it. She references sand as the destruction and result of what it took to make these dreams of the stars possible, directly linking to the exhaustion of Earth's resources to extreme degrees. Sand is used as a scare tactic for Nathaniel when he won't sleep. The Sandman will come and put sand in his eyes and then take his eyes and bring them to the moon to feed his children. Honestly, there's not much different there. If we follow the structure of Hoffman's myth with Scott's modern usage, the myth would be that we throw the sand we create from the colonization and exploitation of natural resources into our eyes in order to distract ourselves from the destruction and exclusion that will allow very few to potentially see the moon. Hoffman takes the Sandman out of the human experience, placing it as a higher entity to be feared, but embodies it into Coppelius/Coppola and arguably Spallanzani as well. While the Sandman, and in other words this techno-future we seek, is something outside of ourselves, it is administered by the figures of power. I truly believe that Hoffman is trying to point us to this conclusion. He observed all these advancements and the people that control them, and he sees how theories and innovations are being proposed in the name of public good. He likely recognized, however, that these goods had its consequences and that the excitement of the future blinds us, like sand in our eyes, to the idea of seeing a better future. The myth being presented as a threat could be the truth that these futures are inevitable, like how Nathaniel couldn't escape Capella in the end and that is out of the everyday man's hands. Even if we tried to resist these innovations, or like Nathaniel tries to resist sleep, the Sandman, and in other words technology, will continue to persist, and our eyes will be brought to the moon whether we like it or not. Thank you.